Jake Morrison was tracking stolen cattle through the scrub brush of West Texas when he heard soft sobbing coming from a grove of mesquite trees. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. He approached cautiously, his hand moving to the Colt at his hip, but what he found among the twisted branches made his blood run cold. A young Apache woman, perhaps 20 years old, lay crumpled against a boulder like a broken doll. Her traditional buckskin dress was torn and blood-stained, her long black hair matted with debris from what had clearly been a violent struggle. When she heard his footsteps, her head snapped up with the wild terror of a wounded animal. Her dark eyes, swollen from crying and bruised from violence, fixed on him with pure hopeless fear. She tried desperately to crawl away, but her injured body couldn't carry her more than a few inches before she collapsed back against the stone. "Please," she whispered in heavily accented English, her voice roar from screaming. Just make it quick. Don't make it last like they did." The words hit Jake like a physical blow as he realized what she thought he intended to do. The implication of what she'd already endured made his stomach turn and his jaw clench with murderous fury. "No, ma'am," Jake said softly, immediately, stopping his approach and raising both hands. "I'm not here to hurt you. I want to help." But the woman's eyes remained wild with terror, her whole body trembling as she waited for him to attack her like the others clearly had. Jake could see bruises forming on her arms and throat, scratches that spoke of desperate resistance, and a brokenness in her spirit that went deeper than any physical wound. "My name is Jake Morrison," he continued gently, slowly, removing his hat and setting it on the ground. "I heard you crying and came to see if you needed help. I give you my word that I will not harm you." The woman stared at him with confusion, as if kindness from a white man was beyond her comprehension. They hurt me," she whispered finally, her voice breaking. Jake felt rage build in his chest like a prairie fire, but forced his voice to remain calm. "I can see that, miss, and I'm sorry it happened to you. It was wrong." He paused, studying her battered face with growing determination. "But whoever did this to you, they're going to pay for it. That's a promise I'm making to you right here and now." As he spoke those words with the solemnity of a sacred vow, Jake Morrison committed himself to a path that would lead him through darkness and ultimately to a love deeper than anything he'd ever imagined. The woman who would change his life forever had just entered it in the worst possible way. But from this moment of evil would grow something beautiful and true. Darts. The woman introduced herself as Ayanna, speaking her name like it belonged to someone who had died in this place. Jake kept his distance while retrieving his canteen and a clean bandana. Every movement deliberate so as not to startle her. "That's a beautiful name," he said carefully. "What does it mean?" "Eternal Blossom," she whispered, then laughed bitterly. "My grandmother said I would bring joy wherever I went. She was wrong." The pain in her voice cut through Jake like a blade. "Your grandmother wasn't wrong," Jake said firmly. "What happened here doesn't change who you are inside. Do you have family nearby?" Jake asked gently. Ayanna shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her bruised cheeks. "My people are 3 days' ride north. I was gathering medicine plants when they found me," she gestured weakly towards scattered herbs trampled in the dirt. "How long ago?" Jake's voice carried a hard edge as he calculated the attacker's head start. "This morning," Ayanna replied, 3 men. They left me here when they were finished." Said no one would believe a dirty Apache squaw. Jake felt his hands clench into fists, but forced himself to focus on immediate needs. "Can you ride?" When she nodded uncertainly, Jake brought his horse closer. "We're going to my cabin. You'll be safe there while you heal." Getting Ayanna onto his horse required patience she'd never experienced from a white man. She flinched at every touch, her body shaking with fear and pain as she settled behind him. When she had to put her arms around his waist for stability, she whispered, "Please don't hurt me. I'll do whatever you want." "I will never hurt you," Jake said with quiet intensity. "That's a promise. You're safe with me." And as they rode toward his cabin, Jake could feel her gradually relaxing against his back, though he knew words alone wouldn't heal the damage done to her trust. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally. Jake was quiet for a moment, considering how to explain simple human decency. Because it's right, he said. Because you deserve help and kindness. And because the men who did this need to face justice. Justice. Ayana's voice carried bitter laughter. There's no justice for Apache women. White men can do whatever they want to us. Jake's jaw tightened with determination that would change both their lives. Not while I'm breathing. They can't. His cabin sat in a small valley, humble, but well maintained. As they approached, Ayana tensed with fear of being alone with him. Jake felt her anxiety and stopped well short of the house. You'll have the bedroom with a bar for the door, he said gently. I'll sleep in the barn until you feel safe. The simple offer of security without expectation was so unexpected that Ayana felt the first crack in her wall of terror. Did I say Jake's cabin was simple but clean, and he immediately offered Ayana the bedroom while gathering medical supplies and clean clothes? There's a bar for the door and a loaded shotgun, he showed her. If anyone tries to get in, anyone, including me, you shoot first and ask questions later. You're giving me a gun? Ayana asked with surprise. Jake nodded seriously. Your safety is more important than anything else. As he prepared to leave for the barn, Ayana spoke so quietly, he almost missed it. I don't understand why you're being kind. Men aren't kind to Apache women. Not all men are like those animals, Jake said firmly. Some of us believe women deserve protection and respect regardless of race. He moved toward the door, then paused. What happened to you was evil, but it doesn't define you. You're still the eternal blossom your grandmother named. The first week passed like a careful dance of fear and patience. Ayana barred herself in the bedroom, venturing out only when certain Jake was working far from the house. She picked at food he left, changed into his sister's dress, and tended her wounds with supplies he provided. But the healing inside the cabin was nothing compared to the war in her mind. Every shadow was a potential attacker. Every sound was approaching footsteps. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw their faces. 3 white men who had turned her from healer to victim in moments of unspeakable cruelty. Jake heard every nightmare from the barn. Each one driving the knife of rage deeper into his heart. He began each day checking for signs she was alive. Smoke from the fireplace, movement at windows, empty plates on the porch. He spoke to her through the door sometimes, just soft words letting her know he was nearby. Ayana, he would say gently. I'm checking the horses now. I'll be back before dark. Simple words that slowly began penetrating her wall of terror. On the 7th day, Jake was repairing fence when he heard real terror. Not nightmare cries, but present danger. He burst through the door to find her backed into a corner, staring at a tree branch scraping the window in the wind. They're coming back, she gasped, eyes wild with panic. I heard them outside. Jake looked at the innocent branch, then at her terrified face, and felt his heart break. She was so lost in trauma that reality and memory had become indistinguishable. It's just a tree branch, he said softly, not moving toward her, but speaking in the calm voice he'd use with a spooked horse. You're safe. No one is coming. But she couldn't hear him over the roar of her own fear. Jake did something that surprised them both. He began to sing, an old song his mother had sung during childhood storms, a gentle melody that cut through panic in ways words couldn't. Slowly, Ayana's breathing calmed, and her wild eyes focused on his face instead of invisible threats. That moment marked the first crack in the wall between them. 3 weeks after finding Ayana, during a thunderstorm that turned the Texas sky black, Jake heard desperate pounding on his door. He ran through the rain to find her on the porch, soaked and shaking, eyes wide with terror that had nothing to do with weather. Please, she gasped. I can't be alone. The thunder sounds like their voices, like they're laughing at me. The admission cost her everything. Asking for help went against every survival instinct that told her to trust no one. Of course, Jake said simply, stepping back to let her into the main room. We'll wait out the storm together. He built up the fire while Ayana huddled in a chair, wrapped in a blanket, but still trembling. Each crack of thunder made her flinch. I built this cabin with my own hands, Jake said, settling into a chair with careful distance between them. Took me the better part of a year. That stone fireplace nearly killed me. Rebuilt it 6 times before I got it right. His voice was steady and warm, a human anchor in her storm of emotions. Why did you build it so far from town? Ayanna asked, speaking more words at once than she had since he'd found her. I like the quiet, Jake smiled. Townfolk ask too many questions. Out here, a man can think without interruption. Don't you get lonely? The question carried genuine curiosity, and Jake realized she was actually engaging in conversation. Sometimes, he admitted, but lonely is better than surrounded by the wrong kind of people. As the storm raged, something shifted inside the cabin. Ayanna began asking about Jake's life, his family, his reasons for living alone. He answered honestly, sharing stories about his sister who died, his parents killed in an Indian raid, his decision to leave civilization behind. You lost your family to Indians, Ayanna observed quietly. But you saved me. Why? Jake looked into the fire, considering something he didn't fully understand himself. Because the people who killed my family were warriors making war. You're a healer gathering medicine plants. What happened to you wasn't war. It was just evil men doing evil things. Not all white people think that way, Ayanna said softly. Most think all Apache are the same. Jake turned to meet her eyes, and for the first time since he'd found her, she didn't look away. Then most white people are fools, he said firmly. When the storm passed and dawn broke clear, both realized something had fundamentally changed between them. She was still wounded, still afraid, still fighting nightmares. But she was no longer completely alone with her trauma. She had found someone who saw her as a person worth protecting, and that made all the difference in the world. Trust was beginning, fragile as morning dew, but real as the sunrise painting their valley gold. Today, with trust growing between them, Jake finally broached the subject burning in his mind since finding her. They were sharing breakfast on the porch when he sat down his coffee and looked at her seriously. Ayanna, he said carefully, I need to ask about that day, about the men who hurt you. If we're going to find them and make them pay, I need details. He saw her go pale and quickly added, only what you can bear to tell me. Ayanna stared at the horizon where heat waves shimmered. There were 3 of them, she said finally, voice steady but distant. 2 young, maybe 25. The third was older, had a gray beard and scars on his hands. He was their leader. Can you describe them more? Clothing, horses, anything to help me track them. Jake's voice was gentle but purposeful. He could see the cost of remembering etched in her face, but also her determination for justice. The leader rode a black horse with white markings. He wore a cavalry hat, but no uniform. One younger man, had red hair and freckles, spoke with an accent. The third was thin, nervous, kept looking around like he expected to be caught. Ayanna paused, hands trembling as memories threatened to overwhelm her. They said things while she stopped, unable to continue. Jake waited patiently, jaw clenched with controlled fury. They talked about other women they'd hurt. Apache, Mexican, didn't matter. Said I was just the latest, that no one would believe me or care enough to come looking. Jake felt rage build like physical pressure. They were wrong, he said quietly. Someone does care, and someone is definitely coming. He studied her face, noting how her hands had stopped shaking as she spoke. Telling the story seemed to give her back some control. There's something else. Ayanna said, voice growing stronger. I want to come with you when you track them down. I want to be there when you confront them. Jake immediately started to object, but she cut him off. I need to face them, Jake. Tracking dangerous men isn't something you do for healing, Jake said, voice carrying experience with frontier law. It's something you do for justice, and justice can be ugly and violent. I won't put you in that danger. I'm already in danger, Ayanna replied firmly. Every day I spend afraid of shadows, seeing their faces in nightmares. That's the danger I'm living with. The only way to end it is to look them in the eyes and show them they didn't destroy me. Jake studied her face, seeing not the broken victim he'd found weeks ago, but a woman discovering her own strength. If you come, you follow my lead completely. No arguments. These men are killers. Ayanna nodded solemnly. I understand, but I won't hide anymore. I won't let them win by making me too afraid to fight back. A day, as they began planning their hunt, both realized they were embarking on more than just a quest for justice. They were beginning a journey that would test everything about courage, healing, and love growing in tragedy's aftermath. Their hunt began with Jake teaching Ayanna tracking skills she'd never needed as a medicine gatherer. Reading sign isn't just footprints, he explained, studying where he'd found her. It's understanding the story the ground tells you. He showed her how disturbed earth revealed the struggle. How broken branches indicated their escape direction. How horse droppings could tell them about their quarry's mounts. Ayanna absorbed each lesson with intensity, treating knowledge as weapons against the men who'd hurt her. They rode north toward Bitter Creek, Jake observed, following a trail weeks old, but still readable, moving fast, but not panicked. They felt safe, probably figured no one would come looking for one Apache woman. His voice carried disgust at their casual cruelty. Following the cold trail, Ayanna struggled with waves of emotion threatening to overwhelm her carefully constructed composure. Every mile toward her attackers brought fresh anxiety, but also growing purpose, she hadn't felt since before the assault. I keep expecting to fall apart, she confided as they made camp their first night on the trail. But you haven't fallen apart, Jake pointed out, admiring her resilience. You've gotten stronger every day. That takes courage most people don't possess. The trail led through 3 small towns, each stop providing new information. In Red River Station, a bartender remembered 3 men bragging about taming savage scores. In Crossroads, a store clerk recalled selling ammunition to a bearded man with scarred hands who paid with unusual silver coins. They're not trying to hide, Jake observed grimly. They think they're untouchable, that no one will challenge them over hurting an Apache woman. The casual arrogance of Ayanna's attackers fed his determination to prove them wrong permanently. But their third day brought a setback that nearly ended their quest. While questioning a saloon girl in Willow Bend, Ayanna overheard 2 cowboys talking about Apache women, saying the same things her attackers had said, laughing about it. The conversation sent her into a panic attack so severe Jake had to carry her outside. What happened? He asked urgently as she hyperventilated in the alley. They were saying the same things, she gasped, laughing about Apache women the same way those men laughed about me. Jake felt his heart break, watching weeks of progress unravel in moments. The casual racism permeating frontier society was as much an enemy as the specific men they hunted. I can't do this, Ayanna whispered. Every town, every conversation, it's like living through it again. Maybe they were right. Maybe no one will ever see me as anything more than a savage to be used. Her despair cut through Jake like a blade, threatening to destroy everything they'd built together. This was the moment that would either break them both or forge them into something stronger than either could be alone. Oh, Jake knelt beside Ayanna in that dusty alley, watching her struggle with demons as real as any physical enemy. Look at me, he said softly, waiting until her eyes met his. Those men are ignorant fools whose opinions don't matter. What matters is that you survived something terrible and you're strong enough to be here fighting for justice. But what if they're right? Ayanna whispered. What if I'm fooling myself thinking I can ever be whole again? The questions revealed the deeper battle she was fighting, not just against her attackers, but against the voice telling her she was damaged beyond repair. Jake was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. Ayanna, I've watched you every day for over a month. I've seen you fight nightmares, face fears, and grow stronger despite everything trying to break you down. The woman I see isn't broken. She's a warrior who's been through hell and emerged stronger. You see me differently because you care about me, Ayanna said, unable to finish the thought. And that makes your opinion less trustworthy, not more. Jake stood and offered his hand, which she took after hesitation. Come with me. I want to show you something. He pulled out a small leather journal, its pages filled with careful handwriting. I've been keeping a record of our journey. Not just the trail, but your progress, your healing, your strength. He handed her the journal. Read what I've written about you. Ayana read page after page of Jake's observations. Day 12. Ayana spoke without flinching when I approached. Day 18, she told me about her grandmother's herbal teachings. Day 23, she stood up to that merchant who tried to cheat her. The entries painted a picture of gradual but consistent recovery. This is who you really are, Jake said when she finished. Not some broken victim, but a healer, a survivor, a woman strong enough to track her attackers across hundreds of miles. Yes, I care about you, but that doesn't make me blind to truth. Ayana looked up with something approaching wonder. You really believe I can do this? Face them and come out stronger? Jake nodded firmly. I believe you can do anything you set your mind to. But more importantly, you need to believe it, too. As they prepared to continue, Ayana felt something shift inside her chest. Not sudden healing, but steady determination to see this through, regardless of cost. The men who'd hurt her had taken enough from her life. She wouldn't let them take her courage, too. The trail was growing warmer, and both sensed they were closing in on their quarry. But neither suspected their next discovery would force them to confront not just her attackers, but the very nature of justice itself. Their hunt was about to become something far more dangerous and complex than either had imagined. Testing not only their courage, but their growing love for each other. Did the town of Bitter Creek squatted in the desert like a wound on the earth, its weathered buildings and hostile atmosphere making clear this was where decent people didn't linger. As Jake and Ayana rode down the main street, they drew stares ranging from curious to openly hostile. Easy, Jake murmured, sensing her tension. We're just asking questions, nothing more. But he kept his hand near his gun and eyes on shadows where threats might hide. This was exactly where men like Ayana's attackers would feel at home. Their first stop was the saloon, dim and reeking of stale beer and broken dreams. The bartender looked them over with calculating suspicion. We don't serve Indians in here, he said flatly when Ayana approached. She's with me, Jake said quietly, his voice carrying warning that made the bartender reconsider. We're looking for 3 men who passed through a few weeks ago. 1 older with gray beard, 2 younger. They had silver coins to spend. The bartender's expression shifted slightly, and Jake caught the flicker of recognition before the man could hide it. Don't know nothing about no 3 men, he said, but his eyes betrayed him. Lots of folks passed through. Ayana stepped forward, voice steady, despite the hostile atmosphere. The older man had scars on his hands and rode a black horse with white markings. They were traveling north from Apache territory. She watched his face carefully, noting how his jaw tightened at her description. Like I said, don't know nothing, the bartender repeated, but his nervous glance toward the back room told a different story. Jake caught the direction of his gaze and filed the information away. They were definitely on the right track. Their investigation continued through the town's few businesses, each stop yielding small pieces, building a picture of their quarry's recent activities. The stable owner remembered shoeing a black horse with distinctive markings. The store cleaner recalled 3 men buying supplies, paying with silver coins, and boasting about recent good fortune. But their conversation with the town's prostitute, a worn woman named Mary, who agreed to talk behind the laundry, provided the breakthrough they'd been seeking. Those 3 you're asking about, she said nervously, glancing around. They were here 2 weeks ago, throwing money around like they'd struck gold. What did they say about where they got the money? Jake asked, though he suspected he knew. Mary's expression darkened with disgust. They bragged about teaching some Apache woman her place. Said they'd taken payment in silver for services rendered. Made me sick the way they talked. Ayana felt bile rise as she realized her attackers had been paid for assaulting her. Paid by whom? She asked, voice barely controlled. Mary shook her head. Didn't say, but they mentioned meeting their employer again soon. Something about a big job that would make them rich. As they processed this disturbing information, Jake felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. Ayana's attack hadn't been random violence. It had been paid assault, part of some larger scheme involving significant money and careful planning. The implications were staggering and infinitely more dangerous than they'd imagined. That night camped outside Bitter Creek, Jake and Ayana tried to make sense of what they'd learned. The revelation that her attack had been paid assault rather than random violence changed everything about their quest. "Someone hired them to hurt me specifically," Ayana said, voice hollow with shock. "But why? I'm just a medicine gatherer." Jake paced around their fire, mind working through possibilities. "Maybe it wasn't about you personally. Maybe it was about sending a message to your tribe or creating fear among Apache women to prevent something." As they talked through her family history, a troubling possibility emerged. Ayana's grandmother had been a respected medicine woman who'd served as intermediary between Apache and white settlements, helping negotiate peaceful trading relationships. Her reputation for fairness had made her valuable to both sides. "My grandmother died 6 months ago," Ayana said slowly, realization dawning. "She was working on treaty negotiations when she got sick. The tribal council said her death set back peace talks by months." Jake felt his stomach tighten as implications became clear. "Someone who wanted those peace talks to fail," he said grimly. "Someone who benefits from continued conflict. If they could provoke Apache into violence by attacking a respected healer's granddaughter, he didn't need to finish." Both understood the diabolical logic. "But who benefits from preventing peace?" Ayana asked, though her expression suggested she was beginning to understand. "Land speculators who want Apache territory opened for settlement. Military suppliers who profit from conflict. Politicians who build careers on fear and hatred." The scope of conspiracy they'd uncovered made their personal quest seem suddenly naive and dangerous. They weren't just hunting 3 violent men. They were potentially threatening powerful interests that had orchestrated her attack as part of larger political schemes. "We're in over our heads," Ayana said quietly. "If this is true, these people have money, connections, probably political protection. What can 2 people do against that kind of power?" Jake looked at her across the fire, seeing not the broken victim he'd found, but a woman who'd grown strong enough to face impossible odds. "We can do what's right," he said simply. "We can expose the truth and make sure those responsible face justice, no matter how powerful they think they are." "It won't be easy," she warned, "and it might get us both killed." Jake smiled grimly. "I've been in dangerous situations before, but this time I won't be facing them alone." The promise, in his words, went beyond their shared quest for justice, touching on feelings that had been growing between them despite the circumstances that brought them together. As they prepared for sleep, both knew the next phase would test not just their courage, but their faith in each other. The men who had hurt Ayana were no longer just criminals to be captured. They were tools of larger evil that threatened everything both held dear. 3 days later, Jake and Ayana finally tracked their quarry to a ramshackle saloon outside Deadwood Gulch. Through the grimy window, they could see the 3 men exactly as Ayana had described them. The gray-bearded leader with scarred hands, the red-haired man with freckles, and the thin, nervous one who kept looking around. "There they are," Ayana whispered, her voice steady despite the magnitude of this moment. Weeks of tracking, healing, and growing stronger had led to this confrontation that would determine whether justice or evil would triumph. Jake studied the scene carefully. "They're drunk, which makes them dangerous but sloppy. There are other people in the saloon, witnesses, if we do this right." He looked at Ayana with concern. "Are you ready for this? Once we walk through that door, there's no going back." Ayana's answer surprised him with its strength. "I've been ready since the day you found me. These men took my innocence, my peace, my trust in the world, but they didn't take my courage, and they didn't break my spirit." Her eyes blazed with determination that took his breath away. They entered the saloon together, and Jake immediately spotted their quarry drinking at a corner table, laughing about something that made his stomach turn. Ayana's sharp intake of breath confirmed these were indeed her attackers. But when Jake looked at her, he saw no fear, only righteous anger that matched his own. You, Ayanna said clearly, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet saloon. The three men looked up, and Jake saw recognition and panic flicker across their faces as they realized their victim had tracked them down. Remember me, she continued, walking forward with dignity that commanded every person's attention. The bearded leader tried to bluster his way out. Don't know what you're talking about, Scory. Never seen you before, but his companions were already reaching for their guns, and Jake's reflexes kicked in with deadly precision. I wouldn't, Jake said quietly, his weapon appearing with practiced speed. There are a dozen witnesses here, and everyone is about to hear exactly what you three did to this woman. Ayanna stepped forward, no longer the broken victim they'd left in the desert, but a strong woman demanding justice. Tell them, she said to the bearded man, voice steady and clear. Tell everyone here what you did to an innocent Apache woman gathering medicine plants. The confrontation that followed would test everything Jake and Ayanna had built together, determining whether justice or vengeance would rule their hearts. But in this moment, facing her demons with the man who'd helped her heal, Ayanna felt stronger than she'd ever been in her life. The reckoning had finally come, and she was ready to face it with courage. Born from love and nurtured by the promise of a future free from fear, the bearded man's face contorted with rage and fear as he realized his crimes were about to be exposed. Shut your mouth, you lying savage, he snarled, rising from his chair. But Jake's gun never wavered, and the deadly calm in his eyes made it clear that violence would only make things worse. Sit down, Jake said quietly, his voice carrying authority that made the attacker reconsider. And listen to what this lady has to say. The emphasis on lady was deliberate, making clear to everyone present that Jake considered Ayanna worthy of honor rather than contempt. Ayanna stepped closer, her head held high with dignity that impressed every honest person in the saloon. 1 week ago, these three men found me gathering plants near Willow Creek. They attacked me, violated me, and left me for dead. Her voice never wavered as she spoke the terrible truth. They thought no one would care about one Apache woman. Murmurs of anger rippled through the crowd as decent men realized what they were hearing. The saloon keeper stepped forward with his own shotgun. Boys, if what this lady says is true, you picked the wrong town to hide in. We don't tolerate that behavior toward any woman, regardless of race. The thin, nervous man cracked under pressure. It wasn't my idea, he protested. Tom said it would be fun. Said nobody would care about one Indian girl. His confession sealed their fate as gasps of disgust filled the room. Jake felt Ayanna's hand briefly touch his arm, not from fear, but from gratitude that justice was finally being served. You're under citizen's arrest, the saloon keeper declared, motioning for other patrons to help restrain the three men. But Tom, the bearded leader, made one last desperate attempt to escape, lunging toward Ayanna with a hidden knife. Jake's shot was precise and final, dropping Tom before he could reach her. The other two attackers were quickly subdued by the angry crowd. It's over, Jake said quietly to Ayanna as they looked at the scene. Tom's body still, his companions bound and awaiting trial, and a room full of people who had stood up for her dignity. They can't hurt you or anyone else ever again. Ayanna looked at the resolution of her nightmare and felt something she hadn't experienced since the attack. Peace. Thank you, she said to Jake, her eyes bright with tears that were no longer from pain, but from healing. You kept your promise. As they left the saloon together, both knew this moment of justice had closed one chapter of their story, and opened another, one where love could finally flourish in hearts no longer burdened by the need for vengeance. The woman who had whispered, "Just make it quick," in desperate fear, had become someone strong enough to face her demons and emerge victorious. And the man who had promised justice had discovered that the greatest victory wasn't revenge, but love growing from the ashes of hatred.